All right, thank you. Let's give a round of applause for Melissa.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am so happy to be here with you all today. And I, as a curious person, I would absolutely love to talk with you one-on-one and ask you a bunch of questions. I have really appreciated the opportunity to do that with some familiar faces and also meet some new folks. So please stay after so I can, get to know you and make those connections. Let's talk a little bit about curiosity, and I have an anecdote that just happened a couple weeks ago. I went to a foraging workshop, which is not something I had ever thought about doing, but it sort of came up when I was doing some searching. And so me, my husband, and my 13-year-old son went to a foraging workshop. And one of the things that was really interesting, a new perspective, I know Patty talked a little bit about perspective, is that we met in a place that I had been sort of hiking and exploring a few times. And we spent a few hours together. There was about 20 of us who had signed up for this workshop. And at the end of it, I realized that I had this whole different real perspective and view of this place that was pretty familiar, because normally what I do is I sort of go and I look out and maybe I listen for birds or that kind of thing. But we were really focused on specific places, on, like, has anybody ever tried foraging or know anything about it? So, you might look at the bottom of a tree, and that would be a place where you might find some mushrooms, or you would look among certain kinds of leaves and you would find an acorn or something that you could forage. And so the reason why I had that insight is because I went into the day, one of my favorite things to do is to sort of go into a day, go into nature with a question, right? So my question was really about parenting. This was a weekend, and I thought, so I do want to ask, does anybody have a teenager in the room? I know I've talked to a few folks. Me too, 13-year-old boy. And does anybody have a toddler in the room? Yeah, me too. So I have a 1.5-year-old daughter, and then I have a 13-year-old son. So we're doing puberty on one hand, and then we're doing, walking and talking and touching everything and pulling stuff out of the walls on the other hand. So I thought, I'm going to be in nature for a few hours. Let me sort of ask the question, what is there to learn from nature, from this space and this place around parenting? And that's what I came up with. I sort of had that aha of really, truly, when we look at something through a different lens, when I decide to sort of focus and get really clear and have the lens of I'm looking over here for this and this, that it's a totally different perspective. So I saw things very differently than I used to. And that was one of the tools that I use when I think about curiosity. So I would love to hear from you all. I know there's lots of different things that might come to mind when you think about curiosity, what it means to be curious, to grow in your curiosity. Some of you all might have sort of a negative connotation of curiosity killed the cat, or Curious George and how he's always getting into mischief and doing things he's not supposed to do. I have a really positive connotation with it, of course, but instead of, and we're a little bit limited on time, so instead of spending, a lot of time talking about the words that come up when you think about curiosity or the stories, I'd like to invite you all to embody curiosity. So if you would, I know you're sipping your coffee still and having your snacks, but stand up, let's take like 15 seconds and don't overthink it, and just embody what you think curiosity looks like, feels like. What is curiosity if you had to do curiosity and put it on? I know this is uncomfortable and a little different, right? Awesome. Yeah, okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you all for humoring me. You did great. I'm curious, I looked around and I saw a few things that sort of stuck out. Did you notice anything of yourself or in others when you saw how they moved their body and what their stance was when they were thinking about curiosity? What did you notice?
I saw people looking, like they were making gestures with their hands to say, like, I'm looking more closely at something.
Yeah. So looking closely, making gestures with their eyes, maybe mimicking binoculars. Anybody else? Did you notice any themes? Yes. Yeah, that was the thing that I think I noticed, that embracing that there were a few people who sort of had their arms out and there was like an openness, a sort of expansiveness, and I really noticed that. I think one of the things I really appreciate about curiosity, and my stance would be maybe something like this, where you're sort of holding something in front of you and checking it out. But there isn't a sense of closedness, right? So like to be able to be curious about something, you can't kind of hold it tightly in your hands. So it's not judgment, it's not control, almost by definition. To be curious and really look at something, you can't be in control mode, you can't be in judgment mode. And then I think the other thing is sort of like being able to look around and sort of check out from a new perspective. That's one of the things I really appreciate about it too. So the simplest definition, which is the one, of course, that I love, of curiosity is just the desire to know. There's a humility in that, I think. There's a sense of, I don't know the answer, and then there's also a care behind it. I don't know and I want to know. I'm interested in going further. I'm putting one foot out. I'm putting a hand out. I am doing that embracing. I don't know and I want to know. Scott Shigeoka, who's at Berkeley and works for the Greater Good Science Center, and he's coming out with a book, I think later this year, even in the next few weeks, called Seek, and it's about curiosity, and he talks about deep curiosity as the desire to understand. So there's the desire to know, and then there's the desire to understand. So really what we'll be talking about today in terms of how to communicate in a way that embodies and fosters curiosity in a relationship, in a team, in a workplace, is really about that deep curiosity of wanting to know, we don't know, and we really care to know about what's going on with somebody. So I am not going to, with our time, there's obviously tons of research, there's so many ways that curiosity is connected to lots of great outcomes, related to feeling better, achieving more, having closer relationships. So if you're interested in, higher engagement, lower turnover, any of those things, curiosity is a tool that you can look at. I know that curiosity generally is not in the sort of top 10 list of things that you would say, as a leader, I really want to build that skill of curiosity. So I'm hoping that today you'll be convinced that actually, indeed, it is something that we can put on the table as a way to show our care and build relationships, build trust, and innovate. So just to sort of reconnect us to burnout, since we've been sort of gushing about how wonderful curiosity is, again, these three components of burnout are really needed in order for us to say, we're there, we're at burnout, this is not just stress. So one of the things I thought about when we started talking about how can we address burnout in this sort of virtuous way is when we overlay positive psychology, positive leadership onto this question and this big obstacle of burnout and how it shows up in our teams and in our world, is what questions can we be asking that feel different, that are not coming from a place of hopelessness? And what tools do we not have? We don't have the money, we're so busy we don't even have time to address it. But what are some sort of positive psychology questions and some stances in terms of addressing it? So things like, if we talk about decreased effectiveness, to talk to the team about what does it look like, what does it feel like when we are at our best? We just did that example on an individual level. But as a team, what does effectiveness look like and feel like when we're at our best? So really sort of painting that picture and envisioning together that future, that sort of positive example of effectiveness. And you can imagine going through with some of these other ones too. So emotional exhaustion, what does it look like for us individually, as a team, as an organization? When we are not exhausted, we are thriving, we feel energized and in flow, and these are the kinds of tasks that we could do all day and still have energy at the end of the day, right? So these are the kinds of questions that help us just turn the object, the question of burnout around and sort of look at it from a different perspective. So that's sort of the hope today. So I told you we would talk a little bit about pre-burnout. So you can see when you look at the tool that we're going to dig into in a few minutes, the Pre-Burnout Individual User Manual. Pre-burnout is something that we don't hear as much about, but it's so important because the idea here is what we're proposing is that we really don't want to wait until we're at the end. Of course we don't have resources if we're burnt out. Of course we don't have extra energy. It's really hard to be positive and look at things from a different perspective. We just don't feel as resourced, right? We're in that chronic stress. We have chronic, maybe physical pain, right? There's a lot going on. And so if we can have the conversation, create this culture of open communication before we get to that point, we're gonna be able to decrease burnout before we get there. The challenge is we don't talk about it until it's sort of in your face. So that's the proposal that we have today. So I won't go through all of these in detail, but you can see, starting out with the honeymoon phase, that's a great one, right? We love it when somebody new comes on the team and they're so excited to be there and they see everything through these rose-colored glasses and they're just, you know, they're excited. They have that sort of rookie mentality and lots of new ideas. When we get to the sort of second stage, which is the onset of stress, this is where we start to think about differentiating between, okay, we're at stress, we feel the stress, is this the normal kind of stress that we're gonna have on a day-to-day basis? Is this because there's just something going on in the organization? Maybe we have a deadline and we have this sort of all hands on deck kind of thing happening, and so we're stressed, right? It's only natural. But at what point do we want to, and this is something we have to talk about as a team, you know, as leaders we can go to our folks and say, okay, at what point are we going to stop and talk about how we can support each other differently, right? Learning some lessons from that so we can actually go from, you know, the chronic stress coming back to maybe just regular old stress, right? That's progress. So being able to have conversations along the way is really what we're proposing as a tool today. So we're going to talk about this user manual. Has anybody heard of the idea of using a user manual in the workplace, creating a user manual to, oh good. Well, I'm so thrilled to share that with you all, that idea of a user manual. So really what that is, and a lot of folks have used it coming into a team to say, when you interact with me, here's some things you should know about me, right? Here are my strengths. Here are my triggers. Here are some of the things that I can do if I need to, because we all have those things, you know, that we have to do, but they drain me. They're not my favorite kinds of things. Here are some ways that I'm misunderstood, right? So you can sort of bring all these things to the table as sort of an introduction. And of course, these are conversations that we can have even with intact teams who have been around for a while. So this tool is us saying, this user manual, and let's overlay burnout into it. So we're really going to specifically talk about, for you individually, for you teammate, for you leader, as we work together, what might it look like? How can we support each other? So it's fairly simple, and I know some of the tools we've offered today, you can either use one-on-one. So these are the kinds of questions that you can talk through. You can do it as a teammate and share it with your leader and have those kinds of conversations. Or if it makes more sense to do it as a team, everybody can complete them, and we can do kind of like we've done at some of the tables today, and share as a team. So a lot of this is going to depend on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I would love afterwards for you all to come up and share and say, how might I shift this to be more effective and relevant and fit into my culture on my team. So we'll talk more about that. But there's a lot of different ways that we can use this, but it really is meant to be individual to you. You can see on there's sort of some recommended questions. It may take one question for somebody to look at and say, okay, this is the question I know I need to talk to my leader about, and that's perfectly fine too. So the process that we've outlined is to complete the questionnaire. You have this conversation with your leader or with your team, and then you identify a single priority. So for some of us, this is hard. Does anybody have a hard time sort of like choosing one thing because they have to say no to a bunch of other things? It all feels kind of important sometimes, right? So this is the challenge of this process, is to say, we know we're all really busy. Let's choose one thing after we've had this conversation in the questionnaire to start with. So we're really talking about baby steps, doing sort of a bite-sized approach and finding ways to make incremental progress, and that's perfect. So we're going to identify a single priority, and then this new tool that I'm probably going to introduce. Has anybody heard of the question burst? Yep. You all have, my teammates have. So the question burst is, I think, a really useful tool from Hal Gregerson. That's what we're going to spend some time on today, and it's so simple, and it's really taking a question, taking a challenge, and throwing questions at it. So that's what we're going to practice today. So after we do the question burst, and we're going to do that together, then you sort of experiment based on what comes out of that. So you might have a question. I was doing some work several months ago, and I decided to do the question burst because I was feeling a little stuck of like, how can I really serve my clients in a deeper way? It felt like there was something missing. So I thought, let me do the question burst. So I just went outside in my backyard, set the 4-minute timer, and my sort of challenge was, what is it that this team really needs? And then I just threw questions at that obstacle for 4 minutes. And out of that, there was one of the questions that I asked of myself, right? I'm sitting there doing this experiment with myself. One of the questions that came out was, what's the most radical way to approach this? And it wasn't that was necessarily the solution, because it really didn't matter. I think one of the things that's so interesting about asking great questions is sometimes it really doesn't matter whether we actually answer the question. It's not about that. It is that sort of curious stance, seeing what we're gonna, focus on and what perspective we will have. So through that lens of what's the most radical way to approach this, it had me just sort of like look at the problem a little bit differently, and I was able to bring in some new tools, and we did sort of like this embodiment piece with the team that really helped us break through in terms of some of the relationships. So that's just a quick example of how the question burst works. So in that example, we will experiment and see how, okay, now that we know this question is what's the most radical way to approach this, then the experimentation is just somehow, and it can be very passive, so we're not talking about, I know we have a lot of academics in the room, this is not experiment where we have to go get data and add a bunch of other things to our to-do list. It's sort of spending some time and opening up and seeing, like I do in nature, right? What might there be? What tools might there be? What insights might there be? And so that's the work of the experiment phase. And then we're going to talk about integrate after we try this together. The other thing that I want to highlight that's so important in this process is a leader guide. So if you're the leader role in this sort of conversation, it's so important to have that self-curiosity, right? A lot of, I think all leadership starts with self-leadership. So the humility, the compassion, the playfulness, and yes, the curiosity with ourselves. So the leader guide is a way for you as the leader, before you have this conversation, to stop and sort of take off some of what's not helpful. Maybe there's a desire to push the team in a certain direction with this conversation. Maybe there is a desire to throw money at the problem because you don't think you have time to address it. So whatever that is, it's just really important to know what assumptions you're bringing into the conversation, maybe what biases you're bringing into the conversation, and to be able to set that aside. Actually, Patty, when you were sharing about rituals, and I was really, going through that process and thinking about that, I thought this might be a place where there's a ritual to sort of take off the assumptions before you go into one of these conversations, right? To sort of like physically say, okay, I'm going to set these things aside, my desire to do things this way, my tendency to overthink this, that. So setting that aside, maybe I'll include a ritual in there. So Let's check our time. Okay, we've got a few minutes to sort of work together here. And I would love for you all at your tables, again, I know we've got a couple small tables, but if we can have one brave person at each table share some challenge when it comes to burnout. So it might be a question of, I'm really trying to understand how I can set boundaries. That feels like, a fruitful place to explore. Maybe it's that I'm just having a really hard time in this work at home culture to differentiate between work and home. I don't have that sort of commute in like I used to, for example. So depending on where you are with preventing burnout, I would love for one person at each table to just think about some challenge, some obstacle, some question that you might have when it comes to either treating, preventing, reducing burnout with yourself or your team. So I'll give you a couple minutes to sort of decide at your tables who's going to be the brave soul that says, yep, I've got something I'd love your all's input on. And just like 2 minutes to sort of share and share with the rest of your table what that is. Got it? Okay. I'm interrupting to make sure. I know some of you all are wanting to solve these problems already, and so since we're not there yet, I'll interrupt. So we have done step 1, right? Hopefully everybody had the chance to sort of state the challenge, what the obstacle is, what the question is. And so now, this is going to be hard for some of you all because we're not answering the questions. The other part that's really hard is when we ask questions, we're not saying, well, the only reason I'm asking this is because, right, we're not qualifying any of it. We're not saying, I don't know how this is going to sound, but, like this might be wild, but we're just going to ask the question. Right? So what we need now is somebody else to volunteer to just be the note taker at the table. And so we're going to take 4 minutes this time, so you have twice as long. And anybody and everybody at the table gets to ask a question about this challenge or obstacle. Right? So no answers, just questions. Are we clear? All right, we're going to play another song. Somebody's going to take notes and you all will ask 4 minutes of questions. Okay, that's 4 minutes. You did it. Okay. So we only have a few minutes to sort of debrief and move on to playfulness, which will be really fun. Okay. I hate to interrupt you all. I know you see, this shows me that you all have really gotten some energy about these issues. So let's start to share, if I can. Is anybody willing to share? We've got about a minute or so just to hear from you all what you may have learned through that process of asking questions. Anybody got a really good question they're going to take away? Yeah, Trish.
I don't have a question. I'm just
Oh.
going to say, what if?
What if? Okay. Great. Yeah, Trish?
So I thought it was really interesting the tendency to want to qualify why your question was asked.
Uh-huh.
So how many times have we asked the question thinking we have to qualify it and give us permission to not qualify it?
Yeah.
I think we have a gazillion questions. Yeah. And it gave us permission to not justify qualifying.
Great. Yeah. So I love that you said noticing, right? So noticing maybe with some curiosity, why do I want to qualify this so much? What is that? Where does that come from? I think there were some folks, maybe when we did that embodiment exercise of wanting to know, did I do it right or wrong? I know I have that tendency sometimes, so it's interesting to notice that. Yes?
I feel like there are only two of us here, but I feel like our questions escalated pretty quickly from why is that a problem to what is the meaning of life?
Wow.
Why do we have to work in the first place? What's going on?
Right. Are we even here? Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I love that. So in 4 minutes, you went from maybe a place that felt a little tactical, some incremental questions, to kind of like, wait a second, how does this connect to the meaning of life? Which is beautiful. Great. Yes?
It was hard to not answer.
Right. Hard to not answer the question, of course. Absolutely. Yes.
I was just gonna say, it's easier, I think, for me to ask the question knowing that there's no answer coming, because it's not, you know, I don't have to qualify it, I'm not just being nosy, it's just something to think about.
Yeah, so some of those parameters are there for a reason, right? Since we know there's not going to be an answer, we're not putting somebody on the spot by asking maybe a tough question, right? So I hope that this question burst tool is something that you can take with you. And again, you can start to imagine that you can sort of make this your own by maybe you use this at the beginning of the process as a team. You can sort of say, let's do a question burst about how burnout might show up in our team, in our workplace. Maybe the question burst is about what could we accomplish as an organization if we could solve this, right? How might this be a benefit to us? So there's so many different ways to use this. A few other things really quickly before we turn it back over to Daniel. Again, we really want you to make this your own, and so there's a lot of things to consider when you think about that. So for example, if you're really not used to, in your organization, having a lot of conversations about engagement or well-being or burnout, maybe you don't have this culture of sort of openness. You might not sort of send somebody this document and say, complete this, we're going to sit down and talk about it. Maybe it's just one of these questions or the question burst tool as a part of your regular team meeting, right? Maybe it's that when you commit to a new project, you all have a conversation about how might burnout show up here. How can we prevent that as we think about the way that we're going to do this work and commit to this work as a team? So many different ways and places to go. The other thing I just want to mention, because I think language is really important, when you sort of hold your organizational values or some of the language that you use in your teams and in your organizations, please integrate that into this. So we don't have to, create something from scratch. It really can be maybe one of our organizational values has to do with effectiveness or excellence. And so we can say, how might burnout be getting in the way of that? And what would it look like for us to embrace excellence by dealing with this issue on the team? So I'm gonna turn it back over to Daniel. Thanks so much for indulging me and for putting on your curiosity. It was really good to be with you.